Commander Jackson Ward adjusted the collar of his dark blue diplomatic suit, his nerves simmering as he stepped off the transport vessel and into the bioluminescent halls of the Carthian Palace. After years of frontier exploration, he was well acquainted with first contact protocols, but this mission was different. He wasn't here as an explorer or soldier, but as Earth's appointed ambassador to the Carthian Empire, an alien civilization with an advanced intelligence, a formidable fleet, and strict, ancient traditions. Negotiating an alliance would require diplomacy on a level he had never attempted before. The halls of the palace glowed with a pale blue light, an effect created by the bioluminescent moss clinging to the walls. Zarthian guards, tall, lithe creatures with shimmering indigo scales and elongated eyes that could see in spectrums invisible to humans, stood at intervals along the hall, watching him with inscrutable expressions. Their eyes, like liquid amber, held a mixture of curiosity and thinly veiled hostility. Carthians were wary of outsiders, but this wariness was especially palpable toward humans, whose recent arrival in this part of the galaxy had stirred mixed reactions across Zarthian society. At the end of the hall, two guards opened a set of towering, crystalline doors to reveal the Queen's chamber. Ward felt his heart beat harder as he entered. The room was cavernous, the walls alive with a network of shimmering biolights that pulsed gently, casting the space in a soft, hypnotic glow. An intricate throne, carved from what looked like obsidian and lined with faintly glowing minerals, rose from the center of the chamber. On it sat the Queen of Carthian Prime. She was a vision larger than any of her subjects, with scales that shimmered in hues of violet and sapphire, a kind of iridescent opalescence that seemed to shift with her every movement. Her long, sinewy form was draped in translucent robes that caught the light like woven starlight, and her elongated eyes regarded him with an expression that was both intensely observant and coldly indifferent. "Commander Jackson Ward," she said, her voice resonating not just in sound but through a subtle, psychic pulse that vibrated in his mind. "Welcome to Carthian Prime." Ward bowed, a gesture he had rehearsed for weeks. "Your Majesty, I am honored to be in your presence. On behalf of Earth, I extend our desire for friendship and cooperation." The Queen tilted her head slightly, her eyes narrowing as if weighing his words. Friendship. Cooperation. Curious notions from a species that is barely a blink in the cosmic cycle. She rose from her throne, her graceful movement filling the room with a subtle, dignified power. Slowly, she descended the steps toward him, her gaze steady and unwavering. "We have studied your species, Commander. We know of your thirst for exploration, for conquest, for dominance. Why should we entertain such notions of alliance?" Ward took a breath, meeting her gaze. "Because we have learned the importance of cooperation, of shared purpose. We're not here to conquer, but to understand, to share knowledge and, if you would allow it, grow together." The Queen's lips quirked in a hint of amusement, a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Words are easy, human. It is your actions that will determine whether such lofty ideals hold any weight." Without breaking eye contact, she extended her slender, clawed hand toward him. Ward hesitated, but years of diplomatic training kicked in. He reached out, feeling a warmth in her hand that surprised him. Her grip was firm, her palm oddly smooth, and as their hands met, a strange sensation pulsed through him, a kind of energy that was both unfamiliar and oddly comforting. He didn't know it then, but in that moment, Carthian custom was engaged, a binding ritual reserved only for beings the Queen deemed worthy of trust, beings she might consider part of her inner circle. This ritual, however, had a deeper biological function that Earth's linguists and diplomats had failed to understand. As they held hands, the bioluminescent walls brightened suddenly, casting an ethereal glow across the room. The Queen's eyes widened, and her hand instinctively drew back as if it had been stung. "What is this?" she hissed, her voice filled with shock and something else, disbelief. Ward was equally taken aback, feeling an odd warmth linger on his skin where they had touched. I don't know," he stammered. "Did I do something wrong?" But the Queen didn't respond. She stepped back, her gaze fixed on him with an intensity that bordered on outrage. Around them, the palace's bioluminescent lights began to pulse erratically, reacting to her shifting emotions. The guards, sensing something amiss, took a defensive stance, their golden eyes flicking between Ward and the Queen. The air grew thick, the weight of her fury pressing down on everyone in the room. This is impossible, the Queen muttered, her voice laced with fury. She glared at him, her eyes darkening. You have done something unforgivable, human. Ward felt a chill creep down his spine. Your Majesty, I assure you, I have no idea what just happened. I didn't mean any disrespect. The Queen let out a low, guttural sound that echoed throughout the chamber. This is not about disrespect, human. This is desecration. Ward's confusion deepened, and he struggled to piece together what she could mean. But before he could speak, 2 guards grabbed his arms, pinning him in place. The Queen leaned closer, her face a mask of barely controlled fury. You are not leaving this planet, Commander. Not until you have taken responsibility for what you have done. The room fell silent as Ward processed her words, his heart hammering as he realized the severity of the situation. He looked at the Queen, his mind racing. Your Majesty, please. Tell me what's going on. I don't understand. Her voice was as cold as the void. What you don't understand, Commander, is that you have somehow, impossibly, fertilized me. The seed of your kind has merged with mine, an event our species considered impossible. And now, the result of this travesty grows within me. Ward's jaw dropped as her words sank in. This was beyond any conceivable scenario he'd been trained to handle. He had unwittingly crossed an interspecies boundary, triggering a biological response that should have been impossible. Your Majesty, I didn't mean, he stammered, his mind reeling, but he had no words to explain something so utterly incomprehensible. The Queen straightened, her fury tempered but undiminished. Intentions do not matter here, human. You have interfered with the purity of our line. This mistake will change everything. Ward struggled to find his voice. What happens now? The Queen's expression was icy. Now? Now you take responsibility for your actions, and you remain here on Carthian Prime until this abomination comes to fruition. You, human, have entered into a binding pact far beyond any treaty. As the guards tightened their grip, Ward's heart pounded with a mix of fear and disbelief. He was trapped in a nightmare of galactic proportions, one that would shake the foundations of Earth and Carthian alike. The air in the Queen's palace was heavy with tension, charged by a psychic undercurrent that every Carthian felt the moment the Queen's fury was unleashed. Throughout the capital city, waves of empathic dread reverberated, a silent alarm that something unprecedented and sacrilegious had occurred. The citizens of Carthian Prime murmured in confusion and apprehension, their fear spreading through the psychic channels they shared with one another. Something was very, very wrong. For the Queen herself, the emotional turmoil was unprecedented. She was bound by centuries-old protocols of restraint and honor, but the rage simmering beneath her calm facade was like a live wire. Jackson Ward, the unwitting human diplomat who had somehow breached an interspecies barrier, now sat confined within the palace's crystalline walls, under strict guard and constant surveillance. The Queen summoned her High Council, a group of advisors composed of the most learned Zarthian scientists, scholars, and spiritual leaders. Each of them carried a solemn gravitas, their scales dulling slightly in response to the Queen's fury, a biological reaction that indicated submission and deference to their ruler. They gathered around her in the palace's inner sanctum, a circular chamber filled with towering holograms of Zarthian history, archives documenting every recorded aspect of their civilization. With a flick of her wrist, the Queen activated a holographic projection displaying Ward's genetic profile, magnified and juxtaposed against a projection of Zarthian biology. Every council member present gasped as they witnessed the evidence that confirmed the Queen's worst fear: Ward's genetic material had somehow triggered a fertilization response within her own system. "This cannot be," said Counselor Shara, a distinguished scientist with scales the color of emerald, who was one of the Empire's leading geneticists. "Our compatibility with humans is supposed to be non-existent. The biological divergence alone. It's impossible." "Clearly, it is not as impossible as we believed," the Queen replied coldly, her voice laced with barely suppressed contempt. Her gaze lingered on the holographic projection, each swirling detail reinforcing the unthinkable reality. "Our own arrogance has brought this upon us." Counselor Araseth, a spiritual leader known for his wisdom, stepped forward and spoke cautiously. "Your Majesty, perhaps there is a cosmic reason for this. Zarth has long believed that every union has meaning, no matter how unexpected. The universe may be guiding us toward a future we did not anticipate." The Queen turned her blazing gaze on him, silencing him with a single look. "You would suggest that I embrace this disgrace, Araseth?" Her voice was like cold steel. "This contamination of my lineage?" Araseth bowed his head. "I do not dare to suggest anything, Majesty. Only that we consider the implications before taking irreversible action." "Implications," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper, but thick with disdain. "You speak as if this is not an affront to all that we hold sacred." Shara, the scientist, cleared her throat delicately. "Majesty, there is another consideration. According to our findings, the human's genetic material not only integrated but appears to have enhanced certain latent traits within our species' DNA. It is as if his presence activated an unused potential within us." The Queen stiffened, her gaze darkening. "So now you suggest that this accident may hold some benefit?" Shara looked away, her scales shifting nervously. "Not benefit, exactly, but potential. The offspring would carry traits of both our species, something that has never been seen before. It would be unprecedented, a new kind of being." A murmur rippled through the council, some members expressing cautious intrigue, others recoiling in horror. The Queen felt her indignation grow. She had been prepared to consider a neutral relationship with Earth, even tolerate an alliance, but to carry a child with the blood of a species she considered so young, so primitive, this was beyond her capacity to accept. Still, Zarthian law was clear. Ending a life conceived within her was forbidden, even if that life was an unintended union with an alien. The ancient texts, passed down through countless generations, dictated that all life within the Queen's body was sacred. Destroying her unborn offspring would defy her role as matriarch and protector of the Zarthian legacy. "Then let it be known," she declared, her voice echoing through the chamber, "that this child will be brought into existence. But it shall never be considered my heir. It will not be Zarthian. It will be nothing more than a liaison. A symbol, perhaps, but nothing more." The council bowed, understanding the depth of her shame and pain, though they dared not speak it. Her words would be law, and the fate of this child would be unlike any in Zarthian history. In his quarters, Ward had finally begun to grasp the enormity of his predicament. His diplomatic mission had transformed into a personal nightmare, and he struggled to process the impossible information he had been given. Guards kept a vigilant watch on him, their unblinking eyes a constant reminder of his captivity. He had demanded an audience with the Queen to explain himself, to try to apologize, but his requests had been denied. Earth's diplomatic protocols had no provisions for this scenario. There was no training, no guidebook for accidentally impregnating an alien queen. Days passed, each one a blur of isolation and dread. Then, one afternoon, a Counselor Shari visited his quarters. She had a delicate, almost apologetic manner, her green scales glinting softly under the chamber's light. "Commander Ward," she began in the soft, melodic tone typical of her species, "I have been authorized to inform you of the decision." Ward stood, his jaw set, ready to hear his fate. "What's going to happen to me?" You are to remain on Carthian Prime, she explained. The Queen has deemed it necessary for you to witness the process, to bear responsibility for the child you have created, however unintended. Ward's stomach twisted. What do you mean, witness the process? Shara hesitated, seeming to search for the right words. The Queen. The child. It will require stabilization rituals, bonding sessions. The Zarthian body is highly reactive to unfamiliar genetic material, especially that of an alien species. The child will need a connection to both parents to develop properly. As such, you will be involved in a series of bonding rituals. Ward's face paled. Bonding rituals? And what if I refuse? Shara's amber eyes softened. Refusal is not an option. Zarthian law is clear: when the Queen's line is involved, her word is final. You are already bound by our law, Commander. He took a breath, attempting to process her words. The idea of being an unwilling participant in the gestation of a child, especially one that would grow within a being so vastly different from him, was surreal and terrifying. And yet, somewhere beneath the shock, he felt a strange stirring, a protective instinct he couldn't quite place. When do these rituals begin? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Tomorrow, Shara said. You will be brought to the Queen's chamber at sunrise. With that, she left him alone, the silence pressing down on him like a physical weight. He slumped against the wall, trying to calm the torrent of emotions roiling within him: fear, guilt, confusion, and an odd curiosity about the life he'd accidentally helped create. He couldn't deny that, despite the strangeness of it all, some part of him felt responsible. The Queen, meanwhile, prepared herself for the ordeal that lay ahead. Her attendants draped her in the traditional robes of maternity, a shimmering gown that symbolized her role as a vessel for the future. She looked at herself in the reflective surface of a crystalline mirror, her face an unreadable mask. She loathed the idea of this ritual, of bonding with a human male, of sharing such an intimate connection with a member of a species she found so profoundly beneath her. And yet, deep within her, she felt a faint, grudging curiosity. Who was this human, really? What traits might this child inherit from him? The morning came swiftly, and as she awaited Ward's arrival, she steeled herself for the first of many sessions. She would never allow herself to forgive him, nor would she allow him any place of honor in her court. But for the sake of her people, and for the integrity of her line, she would tolerate him. The chamber doors opened, and Ward was led in by 2 guards. He looked apprehensive, though his gaze was steady as he met her eyes. Your Majesty, he said, bowing deeply. The Queen regarded him coldly. You are here because Zarthian law demands it, not because I desire your presence. Ward nodded, his expression resolute. I understand. I didn't ask for this either, but I'm here to do whatever is necessary. A faint flicker of respect crossed the Queen's face, though she quickly masked it. She gestured to a circular platform at the center of the room, motioning for him to sit across from her. Let us begin, she said, her voice a blend of resignation and resolve. And as they sat facing each other, the first of many bonding rituals began, an improbable beginning to a journey neither had anticipated, yet one that would change the course of both their lives, and the fates of 2 worlds, forever. The days on Carthian Prime blended into an almost surreal routine for Jackson Ward. Each morning, he was escorted by guards through the palace's bioluminescent corridors to the Queen's private chamber, where they would engage in the bonding rituals dictated by Zarthian custom. The rituals were, in some ways, familiar to him: meditative breathing, hand placements, and brief periods of physical closeness. Yet the sensation of connecting with an alien consciousness was profoundly strange. The Queen's psychic energy enveloped him every time, like a current he could feel but not understand, stirring emotions and thoughts he had no way of fully controlling. Initially, the Queen held him at an icy distance, performing each step of the ritual with rigid formality. Her gaze rarely met his, and when it did, it was cold, calculating, and filled with resentment. Yet, as the days passed, there was a subtle shift. Their connection grew stronger with each session, creating a strange awareness between them, an echo of each other's thoughts, a silent understanding that transcended the barriers of language and species. The Queen's pregnancy progressed at an astonishing rate. Zarthian gestation periods, as Ward had learned from the few diplomats allowed to explain it to him, were accelerated due to their advanced biology. The Queen's form, normally lithe and powerful, began to change. Her scales took on an unusual iridescence, and her aura pulsed with a new rhythm, a tangible sense of life growing within her. Her attendants whispered among themselves, unable to mask their surprise at the rapid development. Some even dared to wonder if the half-human offspring might possess some unusual vigor, a resilience the Zarth had never before encountered. One evening, after a particularly long ritual session, Ward was permitted to stay in the Queen's chamber for a rare, private conversation. The Queen reclined on her throne, her form draped in the ceremonial robes of gestation, her gaze distant as she contemplated the holographic projections of Zarthian star maps that hovered in the air before her. "Your presence has brought great disorder to my life," she said at last, her voice tinged with a bitterness that echoed in the chamber. Ward, seated across from her, nodded, meeting her gaze steadily. "Believe me, Your Majesty, I know. This wasn't something I ever wanted, or even thought was possible." The Queen turned her head, her eyes narrowing slightly. "And yet, here we are. Two beings from different worlds, bound by an anomaly that defies everything we believe to be true." He took a deep breath. "If I could change it, I would. But since I can't, I want to understand. This child, this life we've created, what will it mean for your people?" Her expression softened, just barely, as she regarded him with a contemplative look. "For my people, it is an insult to the purity of our line. An outrage. The Zarthian bloodline is sacred, untainted for centuries. Your presence within it is a contamination." The word stung, but Ward suppressed his frustration. He understood her perspective, even if it was hard to hear. "And yet, your laws forbid you from ending it." She nodded, a trace of resignation in her gaze. "Yes. Zarthian law is sacred, and even I am bound by it. I am the mother of my people, the vessel of our future, and to end a life created within me, no matter how unconventional, would violate the very tenets of our existence." Silence settled between them, heavy and charged. Ward studied her, a question forming in his mind. "Do you feel anything for it?" The Queen's eyes flared, as if offended by the suggestion, but she hesitated. "I feel an obligation, and perhaps a sense of curiosity. This life will be unlike any Zarthian has ever seen. It could be a bridge between our worlds, though I doubt it will ever be accepted by either of them." Ward looked down, feeling an unexpected pang of protectiveness. "Then maybe it's up to us to make sure it is accepted." The Queen's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. "You speak as if you care for it, Commander." He met her gaze. "Maybe I do. It's part of me too, after all. And if I'm going to be here, going through these rituals, I may as well give it my best." Her eyes lingered on him, and for the first time, Ward saw something other than resentment or anger in her gaze, a hint of respect, perhaps even understanding. She did not respond, but simply inclined her head, signaling the end of their conversation. As the gestation progressed, the rituals grew more intense. Ward was required to place his hand over the Queen's abdomen, feeling the faint, rhythmic pulse of the life within. Each session stirred strange emotions in him, a surreal blend of awe, anxiety, and something that felt startlingly like pride. He had never imagined fatherhood, let alone in such extraordinary circumstances, yet here he was, connected to a child that might one day embody the union of two worlds. The Queen's attendants took meticulous records of each ritual, noting every psychic resonance, every fluctuation in the Queen's energy fields, every subtle change in the life growing within her. The Zarthian scientists had never seen anything like it. The child's energy signature was erratic, shifting unpredictably between Zarthian and something entirely foreign, a trait that both fascinated and troubled them. One evening, Shara, the Queen's lead scientist, pulled Ward aside as he was leaving the Queen's chamber. Her emerald scales flickered with an almost excited curiosity, a rare sight for the normally composed scientist. "Commander Ward," she began, "I thought you should know. The child displays extraordinary resilience. Its development is unusual, accelerated yet stable. We have detected traces of abilities that even Zarthians rarely manifest." Ward raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite himself. "What do you mean?" Shara hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Zarthians possess limited psychic abilities, a kind of mental connection with one another, but only the Queen's line is capable of channeling higher-level energies. Your offspring appears to possess a capacity for both, and perhaps even something beyond. Ward's mind raced. He had no psychic abilities himself, no inherent powers that might explain this. So, it's not just a hybrid, but something new? Shara nodded. Indeed. It may be capable of bridging the two species in ways we cannot yet comprehend. But whether that bridge will be stable or volatile, we cannot say. Her words stayed with Ward that night, mingling with his swirling emotions. What kind of life was he bringing into existence? How would this child be perceived by both Zarthians and humans? A miracle, an abomination, or something else entirely? The thought kept him awake, and he found himself thinking more about the child's future than his own predicament. The Queen, too, found herself affected by the rapid progression of her pregnancy in ways she hadn't anticipated. The child's energy thrummed within her, more vibrant and potent than any life she had carried before. At night, she could feel the faint traces of its consciousness reaching out, brushing against her mind in a way that felt disconcertingly human. One night, unable to sleep, she sent for Ward. It was a breach of protocol, an informal request she had never made before, but something within her compelled her to seek his presence. When Ward arrived, visibly surprised and slightly wary, she motioned for him to sit beside her. They sat in silence for a long time, the soft glow of the bioluminescent walls casting an ethereal light around them. "I feel its thoughts sometimes," she admitted quietly, her gaze fixed on a distant point in the room. "They are strange. Unlike any Zarthian mind." Ward looked at her, sensing the vulnerability behind her words. "Maybe it's trying to understand you too." The Queen's lips curved in a faint, almost wistful smile. "A part of me wonders what it will look like, what kind of mind it will possess. It is neither Zarthian nor human, and yet it is both." Ward nodded, feeling a surge of empathy for the being they had unwittingly created. "Maybe that's what makes it special." For the first time, the Queen did not respond with hostility or resentment. Instead, she looked at him with something approaching acceptance. They were, in some strange way, partners in this endeavor, two beings bound by a child they had never intended to create. The following morning, the Queen's attendants detected a change in the child's energy, a marked increase in its psychic signature. It was nearly ready to emerge. The Queen summoned Ward once more, this time not as a prisoner or an interloper, but as the father of her child. They stood together, facing each other, united by a shared purpose that transcended species or politics. The Queen's gaze softened as she looked at him, a silent acknowledgement of the journey they had endured together. "You have caused me great turmoil, human," she said, her tone softer than it had ever been. "But you have also shown me that even the unexpected can hold value." Ward inclined his head, his voice filled with a newfound respect. "And you, Your Majesty, have shown me that even the most improbable paths can lead to something worth protecting." They stood together in silence, awaiting the birth of the child who would redefine the destinies of their worlds. And in that moment, they understood that, whatever the future held, they were bound together by a bond deeper than diplomacy or duty, a bond forged in the strange alchemy of fate, biology, and something that transcended them both. The birthing chamber was a place of ancient power, reserved only for moments of immense importance in Zarthian history. The chamber was circular, with walls made of crystal that refracted light from the bioluminescent moss lining the edges, casting dancing shadows and ethereal glows across the space. Intricate designs spiraled outward from the center of the floor, depicting Zarthian history, etched into the stone with precious minerals that glimmered softly in the ambient light. The chamber pulsed with energy, a silent reminder of the life about to enter the universe. Ward stood near the entrance, his heart racing as he took in the scene. This was a moment he could never have imagined, and yet he felt inexplicably drawn to it, a strange protectiveness simmering within him. It was no longer just a matter of diplomacy or obligation, this was his child too. His life, his legacy, entwined with that of the alien queen. The queen reclined on a large, padded platform at the center of the room, surrounded by her attendants and counselors, each of them focused intently on the pulsating energy that emanated from her. Her usual regality was softened by an aura of vulnerability, a glow that seemed almost maternal. Her gaze met Ward's across the chamber, and in that silent exchange, he saw something he had never expected: trust. The air was thick with anticipation, the psychic energy of the gathered Zarthians palpable, like an electric charge. The counselors and scientists began to chant in a low, rhythmic tone, a resonance that filled the room and harmonized with the Queen's own energy. Ward watched in awe as the Queen's bioluminescent scales glowed brighter, her form seeming to expand and radiate with the rhythm of the chant. "Step forward, human," one of the counselors instructed, gesturing to a spot beside the Queen. Ward took a deep breath and approached, feeling the weight of countless Zarthian eyes on him. As he reached the platform, the Queen extended her hand, a gesture she had used many times during their bonding rituals. He took her hand without hesitation, the warmth of her scales a familiar comfort now. The chamber fell silent as the Queen's voice filled the space, steady and resonant. "Today, we witness the birth of a life that defies the boundaries of our worlds. A child born of two species, destined to bridge a gap that has existed since time immemorial. Let it be known that this life, though unconventional, is protected by my own blood and by the binding of our laws." Ward felt a surge of pride and awe at her words. This child, their child, would be more than a symbol, it would be a beacon, a possibility for unity that had once seemed unimaginable. As the ritual reached its climax, a ripple of energy passed through the Queen, her scales flashing with intense bursts of light. The attendant stepped back, giving her space as the energy within her coalesced, forming a concentrated glow around her abdomen. The light intensified, illuminating the chamber as the Queen exhaled in a single, controlled breath, releasing the life within her. The light dimmed, revealing a small figure resting in her arms. The newborn was unlike anything Ward had ever seen, a being that carried the distinct characteristics of both species. Its skin was a soft, iridescent hue that shifted with the light, bearing faint traces of human features mingled with Zarthian elements. Tiny scales adorned its skin in delicate patterns, and its large eyes were an amalgam of human warmth and Zarthian depth, a liquid amber that shimmered with intelligence far beyond its years. The chamber was silent as everyone took in the sight of the child. The counselors, scientists, and guards watched with a mixture of awe and disbelief. This being represented something entirely new, a blending of worlds, a living testament to the possibilities of life in the cosmos. The Queen looked down at the child in her arms, her expression softening in a way Ward had never seen before. There was pride there, and perhaps even a hint of love. She held the child carefully, as if cradling both the future and the hope of her people. Then, with a steady hand, she extended the child toward Ward. "Commander Jackson Ward," she intoned formally, her gaze meeting his. "Take your child, a bridge between our worlds, an heir of two legacies." Ward took the child into his arms, feeling a surge of emotion unlike anything he'd experienced before. The child looked up at him, blinking with large, inquisitive eyes that seemed to see straight into his soul. He felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility and pride as he cradled the tiny being against his chest, marveling at the warmth of the life they had created together. The queen spoke again, her voice echoing through the chamber. "This child shall be known as Kari, a name that signifies unity and the potential for growth through connection. Kari shall be under the protection of the Carthian Empire and shall inherit the strengths of both lineages." The counselors murmured their approval, and Areseth, the spiritual leader, stepped forward. "This is a day that shall be remembered in our histories. Kari shall not only be a symbol but a promise that our worlds can coexist, that we are not as different as we once believed." The queen's expression softened as she addressed Ward directly, her tone sincere. "Commander Ward, you have proven yourself more resilient, more honorable than I could have imagined. Though our journey began in misunderstanding, you have shown loyalty, patience, and a commitment to a life that neither of us expected. You may consider yourself part of the Zarthian legacy, just as Kari is part of yours." Ward bowed his head, feeling the gravity of her words. "Thank you, Your Majesty. I am honored to be a part of this. Of something so much greater than myself. I swear to protect Kari, and to work for the unity we both desire." As he held Kari, Ward felt the eyes of every Zarthian in the chamber on him, a mixture of curiosity, acceptance, and perhaps even respect. He knew that he and Kari would have a long road ahead of them, one filled with challenges and the burden of representing the potential for unity. But he also felt an undeniable sense of purpose. The queen gestured to the counselors, her gaze firm. "Let it be recorded that this day marks the dawn of a new era. Kari shall be educated in both human and Zarthian customs, with the wisdom of both worlds to guide them. And though I may not see eye to eye with Earth, I acknowledge this child as the start of a new legacy." With the formalities completed, the queen dismissed her counselors, leaving only herself, Ward, and Kari in the quiet chamber. She turned to Ward, her expression thoughtful, perhaps even reflective. "Commander, our worlds are still divided, and there are those on both sides who will not easily accept what has occurred here. Kari will face trials, prejudice, perhaps even danger. But they will also be a living example of what is possible when we look beyond the boundaries of our own beliefs." Ward nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "I know. But I'll stand by Kari, no matter what. They're part of me, part of us. And if it takes a lifetime, I'll do everything I can to make sure they're accepted by both worlds." The queen regarded him with a solemn expression, and for a moment, there was something almost tender in her gaze. "Then I entrust Kari to you, Commander. You are not Zarthian, yet you have proven your worth. And perhaps you have taught me that even a queen can be surprised by the universe." With that, she placed her hand over Ward's, the gesture finally one of true connection rather than mere obligation. They stood together, a human and an alien monarch, united by the child in Ward's arms, and by a shared responsibility that transcended their differences. As they exited the chamber, the light of Zarthian dawn spilled into the hall, casting a soft, golden glow over them. Ward knew that the future would be complex, filled with uncertainties, but he felt a quiet certainty within himself, a resolve to protect the life they had created, to forge a path for Kari, and to continue building a bridge between their worlds. For Kari, the heir of two worlds, would not just be a symbol, but a beacon, a new hope, born of two species, destined to change the future of both.